Okay. Hello, Cerridwen.
Hi, Aninha. Pleasure to be with you today.
You too. I want to say we're with a real live witch today.
How true.
That's my informal introduction, and a more formal one. I know you really as a community member where we live, but I recently read your book, and now I know you as an author. And huh?
Oh, there was a little, it was just making a funny noise there for a minute. It
Okay.
seems okay now.
Okay.
All right,
So I listened on Audible to Broth from the Cauldron. I think it's a wisdom journey through everyday magic, which I don't listen to a lot of novels or memoirs because I tend to only want to read things that I'm learning something. So it was a real treat for me to just lay back and receive all your stories, a lifetime of incredible stories, deeply personal, culturally relevant, instructive about what it means to be a witch. Just just delightful, and I highly recommend it. So I know you as an author. I know you also wrote Heart of the Fire, which I have not yet read.
yeah, it's a historical novel set in 16th century Scotland about witchcraft. So it's definitely a good kind of an intro, kind of takes people back down into, our historical roots, which I know you've mentioned that, it's kind of important for people of European descent to connect with our European pagan roots.
Yes.
And that there's been so much discussion lately about, how problematic it is when white people come to another culture and say, oh yeah, I want to learn your shamanism. I want to learn what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But that there can be this sense of, white people kind of just taking over or kind of taking from that tradition without having anything to give back. And I know something I have appreciated about practicing witchcraft, which is a kind of a kind of a reconstituted version of European shamanism, is that when I meet someone from another tradition, I can say, oh, tell me about what you do. Oh, that's so similar. We do this, or oh, that's really different. Oh, how interesting. You feel that way about owls. Oh, we feel totally differently about owls. I have something to exchange. And so I'm not coming just with an empty hand saying, oh, gimme, gimme, gimme. We took everything else from you. Now we'd like your spirituality too.
Yeah.
That there's a better feeling about, oh, okay, I have something to share. I have something to exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be, a gift in both directions that then, isn't so much of that just sort of taking over the way our culture has had a tendency to do over a long period of time.
You're jumping right into very important topics, and I appreciate it very much. I'm going to just take off this self view, which is super annoying, so I can just be with you. There we go. Yeah. Well, thank you for naming that. That's definitely something I wanted to dive into, and it's so complex. I myself, as you know, do African divination and have, sat with what does that mean and how can I hold that in an honorable way, and so yeah, why don't we just start there?
Yeah, well, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if you've been taught by someone who has given you that information, if a shaman from another culture is willing to teach you and then says, I'm willing for you to go forward and share this, then you can do it, as far as I'm concerned anyway. That's, that's up to them to determine, but I've seen that many times. I know when I was very young, I was doing some sweats with a Native American man who said that some people in his tribe did not feel that he should be teaching white people. But he also said, but most of our young people don't want to learn this. Do we need to pause during this barking? I'm sorry.
Is there a way to have her?
All right, should be okay now.
There we go. No problem.
So where were we there?
So a Native American who said
Right.
that.
The said, but he said most of our young people don't want to learn. They are going towards the white culture to try and be successful, to try and fit in. And he says, so many of my people were killed. There are not enough native bodies for all the spirits that were lost. If some of those people, those spirits come back to me in a white body, I will not turn them away. So there are people who see it that way. And, then, I think that, I know you worked with Malidoma Some, and I've worked with him too. I've certainly studied with a number of different shamans from different traditions, and I'm always interested to learn, what they have to teach, and to see the world through their perspective. And if I'm given permission to share that information, then I'll share some of that information. So it's not that I think it's that white people should never. I mean, I teach people of all different. I teach European shamanism, but I have all different kinds of people come to me to learn it, and certainly that's all to the better. All to the good as far as I'm concerned. So I don't have that boundary on what I teach, but I want to be respectful of the dialogue that's been happening about, what do we do about, the white people who take a class and then call themselves a shaman from this tradition, and maybe they haven't really been given permission, to share that lineage. And what does that what does that mean when someone who's not of a lineage, can they become part of the lineage? And again, this is something that I can't even weigh in on, really. It's something that really the keepers, the traditional keepers of that lineage, are the only ones who can say, how they want it to go. And then I'm going to respect that, in the same way that, I've seen people, for instance, who, women who said, oh, well, it's sexist for them to say that a menstruating woman can't be in the sweat lodge. I'm going to go in anyway. And I'm like, well, this is their tradition. And, I may ask questions about that. Oh, why do you think that is? But I'm not going to violate it. If I'm here to learn, I need to learn on those terms and say, oh, okay, if that's your rule. And I personally wouldn't want to go in a sweat when I was on my moon. I mean, basically the sweat lodge is supposed to mimic the woman's moon in a sense. It's supposed to help the men get into that similar state. To add those two things together, in my opinion, would be too much of the same energy, and too enervating and too draining for the woman in question, at least when it's me. I see the wisdom of that, and I don't think it's derived from an anti-female feeling. I think it's derived from a sensitivity to what the energies are of those two things, and that they don't combine well.
Right. Yeah. You're not kind of putting a Western lens on it and kind of feeling into what is the deepest intention of that.
Right. I'm not saying that I'm not saying there's no misogyny in any of these old traditions, because, those traditions have moved through this period of time in which misogyny is very much the way things work. And all of them, all of us have been contaminated by that. We're all contaminated by misogyny at this point. We're all contaminated by racism at this point. So the question is, how can we uncontaminate? How can we free ourselves from that brainwashing that all of us have gotten quite a bit of? And we just have, and it's a lifelong thing. We just have to keep working at it, moment by moment, minute by minute, and trying to move through it as best we can.
I can see you've thought deeply and for a long time about these things.
Yeah, I've been working on this stuff, very consciously since I was in my 20s. And so, I mean, some of it I started earlier than that. I became aware of racism when I was 7, and that's one of the stories in my book is
I remember it well. Yeah.
Being best friends with the only little Black girl in my school. I didn't know she was a Black girl. I just thought she was had the best skin of anybody I ever saw.
Mm.
That was my pure childlike view was, ooh, wow, she's the prettiest person I've ever seen.
Mm.
Um, and then finding out that other people did not feel that way, and that my friendship was going to cost me a great deal.
And
Um,
it did. Yeah.
and and that there was this horrible thing that
Mm.
was
Very
called
shocking. Yeah.
racism. And so, that's why I started becoming, and probably that's around when I started also thinking about, because my baby brother had been born when I was 6.5. And so it's like, oh, wait a second. How come everybody likes the boy better than the girls right away? What's that
Mhm.
about? It was very mysterious to me. Why are boys better than girls? I didn't like, there was nothing obvious about why that would be true, but it was clearly true that was what people thought.
Mhm.
And so that feeling of rebelling against the way people were doing things and deciding that I was going to have to really think about these things for myself, because I didn't agree with what I was seeing around me. And I knew it was wrong at my deepest core. I knew it was wrong. And so
And
then it was like, well,
how?
how am I going to deal with that?
Yeah.
What's next?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go back for a second because language is so important. And I noticed saying a Western view, and of course, Native people live here in the West, and so it's more of
Yeah.
a Eurocentric view. So I'm
Ah.
trying to be
Uh-huh.
aware of language.
Oh, yeah, good. Well, that's good to. I know that's the thing. That's one of those things. It's like we keep refining.
Yes,
Yeah, it's like Western is what we were all saying. What
yes,
starting in the '60s, and
yeah,
now people have a better way of defining it, which is Eurocentric. Where it's
yeah,
like, yeah, that's
yeah.
more precise, because yeah, what about all these Native people who live in the West?
Exactly.
What do they just suddenly cease to exist? Or,
Right.
and also the dichotometric West and East, as if those were the only two flavors.
Hmm. Hmm.
When of course North and South is actually a very major
Hmm.
division, where again Europe and the United States, being located in the North, tend to be the more prosperous
Hmm.
nations,
Hmm.
and nations in the Southern Hemisphere tending to be less. Not There's exceptions like Australia, but
Hmm. You know what I'm appreciating is, we're both, I guess we're both crones in the
yes,
language of
yes,
women's spirituality.
yep.
And there's a way you're holding it and that I'm starting to move into as well, which is very different than the youth and what, and who I was, and I'm sure who you were, with that kind of the fervor that comes with youth to change things.
Mhm.
And then I'll speak for myself, just there's this kind of opening and softening and seeing the long view. Yes, this is a lifetime process. We're never going to arrive. It's,
Right.
it, and somehow there's a spaciousness that comes with aging, it seems. I'm curious what your experience is in terms of your arc of holding these issues. And
That's a good question. I often don't. I don't know if I feel very spacious about it. I think I feel that pressure that I have felt throughout, that we're running out of time. That the time is very much of the essence. That I feel very pressured by,
mm,
you know, what we're seeing with climate change and what that means in terms of
right,
the health of our planet, of our ecosystem.
right, yeah,
Um, I have twin granddaughters now who just turned 5 years old, two days ago,
mm,
and I, I have concern for them. I know that there's been some progress, against misogyny since I was a little girl,
mm,
but it feels like not nearly enough. I
yeah,
feel like we're still so, it's, I mean, and that we're seeing such backsliding now happening in so many places, that again, the war against women, and the trying to outlaw abortion, trying
mhm,
to outlaw women's sovereignty and women's choices. Um, all this, all this stuff is very very painful, to look at. I know when we first started seeing footage of Black people being harassed or even killed by the police, because of people having their phones. And that's a great thing that now we can see things happening all over the country. But initially I was like, whoa, what happened? Are we in 1960 Alabama? What just happened here? Are we not further along? Mm-hmm. This didn't stop. Mm-hmm. It was shocking and dismaying to me. It's still dismaying, maybe a little less shocking, because I'm like, oh, okay, this is indeed, we have not made the level of progress that I thought we had. Yeah. And that's painful. And I know as you get older, I don't know if you're experiencing this, there's this past life review where you start kind of looking at your whole life, and certainly it's what's inspiring this memoir and the one that I'm currently working on. It's okay, well, what does this all mean anyway? Have I made any progress? Have I made any difference in my life? And sometimes it feels a little, there's those moments where it's really encouraging, like when Barack Obama became president, and we felt like, wow, we broke through that ceiling. Mm. And then there's the discouragement of thinking we were breaking through it with Hillary Clinton for women. Mm. And then how that went so completely in the other direction, like more completely than probably anyone could even imagine how, how thoroughly misogyny triumphed in that election. And how painful that is, and that it's kind of hard for me to have put so much of my life into trying to change the world in a good way, and to see kind of how little progress there really is. It's a little discouraging for me. So I guess I envy you being in that more spacious place, but I have to be honest and say it's not how it's feeling for me right now.
I appreciate.
I'm feeling sad that I don't have, in a sense, more to show for my years of activism. And for so many of us, I mean, that there has been, I feel like I've worked on so many fronts, the feminist front and the gay rights front and the civil rights front and the environmental front, just trying to push the envelope in all these different directions and bringing the goddess back, which is really, I would say, my core, my core work is bringing back the goddess, and believing that if people, again, can honor the goddess and honor the divine feminine, that in and of itself would really help shift, our whole way of interacting with the world and with each other.
So I'd like to just take a pause there. So, because when I speak to people, I like to also kind of open up the experiential, and relational field. So it's interesting what you're saying. So first of all, there's a little shame that comes up of like, oh, fuck, I shouldn't be spacious, right?
No. You should definitely be spacious.
I'm just sharing, because for me, the inner world of all this is also important, because we can talk about the issues out here forever. Right. And then I'm really interested in weaving the inner soul of these conversations, how they live in each of us. So I just wanted to name that. Yeah. Because there's a whole cultural flavor of there's a right way to do it, right? And so it's like, I'm not in the right way. So I'm just naming that. I got that for sure. Yeah. And the other is, one of the things I'm interested in, the podcast is called Encompassing Conversations. I'm not sure if you knew that, but meaning encompassing polarities and things that don't always go together. So
right.
On the one hand, I have a grinding daily suffering, and on the around the world issues, and on the other hand, I'm learning to let go, and not think that
Right. It's not all up to you. After all, next generation has to take over. We gotta pass that torch. Right. That's the truth too. That I mean, like I tell my younger friends, I'm like, hey, I'm too old to run from the police anymore. You're gonna have to go to the damn demonstration. I did my share of running from the police. It's time for you. You're young and peppy, Right. So I mean, we do have to let go and let the younger people, kind of take it to the next level. That all these things have to go, and I hope I can integrate more of that spaciousness. I have moments, but I'm just, it's funny because you're saying, well, you feel like you're not doing it right, and I'm like, well, damn, I'd like to be more spacious. Why am I not over here in spacious anyway? So that's a funny mirror.
That's very funny.
Yeah, both of us going, oh, gee, maybe we're, I should look into that a little more. I should do a little more meditating.
It's
Less doom
fascinating.
scrolling and more meditating.
Right.
So
Oh, I love it. Well, so I would love to like jump into this whole witchy thing, and so I want to share kind of where I'm coming from first, because we each have our own little perch and lens and experiences. So it's always been this thing over there, those witches, and you speak often in your books and just out loud about past lives. You hold a very nonlinear view of human experience, right? And so I have deep affinity for, I studied the Peruvian traditions and West African, and the West African in particular. I just felt like, oh, I'm home.
yeah.
I'm home. This is it. I know this. I already know this. It's just remembering it, right? But so it's interesting being of European descent, this life, if we want to say that way, that it's not only that I'm neutral, I feel a slight, I don't know if it's disgust or it's a negative, there's a negative feeling towards witches. And so I'm very interested in that. I'm very curious about that. And also there's a glamour in our culture about other shamanic traditions,
Right.
quote unquote, kind of
Right.
Exotic, which is, not something people want to be thought of as, but I think that's how a lot of European ancestral people, white people, think of it. It's like, oh, I do too, right? There's this like, oh, wow. Oh, and there is this grabby thing, and we have to be conscious of that. So I'm just going to say one more thing about it, and then I want to hear what you have to say, is that retrieving one's European lineages, if there's I'm very into the organic, listening to the soul. My soul hasn't, it's tried, but it hasn't really, there's not an aliveness there.
Right.
So I don't want to act from should. However, the fact that it's not neutral makes me really curious.
That's very smart.
Right?
Yeah,
so anyway,
totally.
I'm just curious, anything you want to say about that, and white people so interesting. I'm just going to say European Americans for today. Why aren't we hungry there the way we are towards going to the Amazon? Why isn't there the same hunger and fascination, right? I'm just curious what you think of that and anything else you want to say.
I think there's a couple of elements there. One, I think it's just people are often simply fascinated by something that's different or other, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I know a couple of people who teach white Americans who teach meditation in India, and people in India just love to come and see what the American yoga, American meditation. Ooh, it has a much bigger cachet because it's different, because they're Americans. They must know something really special about meditation.
Well, that's a complex thing we could unpack in terms of why.
So there's just that basic thing of, we often are fascinated by the other. It seems, like you say, exotic and interesting and all that. But also, I think there's kind of a much darker situation in terms of witchcraft or Native European paganism, which is that that tradition was basically annihilated over about a 300-year period of witch burnings, and that probably 90% or 85% of the people burned were female, that it was very much oriented against women and women's power, and that both the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches had very severe, murders of who knows how many, because there was not a whole lot of good record keeping, and many records are lost. Estimates range from hundreds of thousands to possibly millions of people who were killed during this 300-year time period, starting in about the late 1300s or mid 1300s and moving into the mid 1700s, which is not that long ago. I think 1740 is maybe the last legal witch burning in Scotland. That's not really that long ago. So there's a deep psychic wound in European people about this, and particularly in women. And like I do a lot of hypnosis work with women, and often women come looking to be able to express their power more, that they're very inhibited about their power. And when we do past life work around that, we very often go back to the witch burning times and what happened to powerful women then. Mm-hmm. And how they were raped and tortured and then often burned alive. I mean, the most hideous deaths people could die. And that this has scarred us very deeply and has put a pretty big inhibition in many women today of, oh yeah, no, I don't think I want to go over there. Whoa, no, that's, yeah, forget that. No. And so there's this, yeah.
This is so interesting, because when I, in trauma training, this is right. Is the sign. Okay, exactly. There's some trauma here.
Yeah, trauma. So people are having, so there's a major trauma response. And then, there's also the fact that, basically the people who hated the witches won. They won. And so then they got the right to define them. And witches became defined as people who did evil, people who do harm, people who do, and interestingly called black magic. So again, seeing the negative towards the black, towards the dark, towards the night, towards the feminine, that all of that is presented as being evil and wrong. And so, there's, I sometimes say to people, say, well, if witches are good, how come they have so much bad press? And I say, well, imagine that Hitler won World War II. What do you think in 200 years people are going to say about Jews? It's going to be the same thing that they say about witches. The winners write the history books, in that same way that Native people were described as being savages that of course had to be wiped out by the civilized white people. I mean, what could they do? The people who win are the ones who shape the dialogue. So all of this has been shaped in our minds. I also sometimes say, well, we witches, when we get together, we sometimes argue, which hurt us more, Inquisition or Hollywood? Because Hollywood, of course, continued the idea of the bad witch, the wicked witch, the dangerous witch. And that's often what has influenced people, even if they don't go to church and hear some bad things there, they see it in the movies of, ooh, these are evil people, evil women who do those things. And so I think that there's that resistance, that's very natural for many people to have a resistance about, oh yeah, I don't want anything to do with that thing. It's, it's dangerous. I would be a bad person. There's all sorts of subconscious judgments that come up that make people just want to, let's just walk around that. Let's not go over there. Or that, I've certainly talked with many women, sometimes even in my own groups, who are like, well, why do we have to use this word witch? I mean, it's such a negative word. And why can't we just say, New Age light worker, or, why don't we call ourselves something different? There's people want to look for something more palatable. But I say, well, the very reason that we use the term witch is to reclaim it in the same way that Black people decided to reclaim Black, and that gay people decided to reclaim words like queer or dyke. That when you take the word back that's been used to hurt you, then there's a power in it. And that's worth pursuing, to reclaim the power that's in that word. I mean, they wouldn't have tried to warn us off it so intensely if there wasn't a lot of power there that they did not want us to have. So that said, I also think that there's, as I was saying about this Native teacher that I went to, who said that he thought that some of his people were coming back to him in white bodies. That you're also talking that many Native people were wiped out, or were, their numbers were severely reduced by violence and by sickness. And so I think, because I do have that reincarnational view of things, I do also believe that people come back wanting to complete something they were doing in their previous life. And if they have shifted, racial identities or gender identities, sometimes that's very challenging. They're like, oh, wait a minute, I don't relate to this. I don't relate to white people's stuff. I relate to this thing over here. And sometimes there's a really good reincarnational reason for that, is my personal opinion. And I think that it's just, again, I'm not trying to impose that on anyone, but that's just something that I believe that, of course, people are going to be attracted or disattracted very strongly based on, what's your past life lineage, as well as what's your biological lineage is, I think, only part of the situation.
Yeah, I experientially feel that I try not to land in any particular beliefs, but I experientially it makes the most sense.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah. So as you speak about that, as you speak about witches and the women who don't want to use the word, my body resonates. Like I do feel that. I very much do. So I'm just seeing as we speak, like, okay, that's something to really explore, especially, have that attitude about reclaiming. And yet this particular thing, I don't know about reclaiming that,
Oh, right. This one is maybe hits a little too close to home in some reincarnational way, where you may have some old trauma that you're just like, I don't want to take the lid off of that box.
Right.
There's a reason I put that in the back, and I want to keep it back there. And yeah. So, and again, it's like I also think, you can't necessarily force or push yourself into a direction you don't want to go. You can kind of just have that curiosity and go, well, that'd be interesting. I wonder what would happen if I did do a past life regression and asked to look at something like that. Because you don't have to believe literally in your past lives to do that. I often tell people, sometimes people come back from a past life regression and say, well, I just don't know, if I was maybe just making that up. And I say, well, but let's, out of all the things you could have made up, this is what you made up. So let's assume it's significant.
Holding it lightly. And there's
it's like, so if you made it up, well, of all the millions of stories you could have made up, this is the one you made up. So let's assume it's a very significant story in any case. And what do you want to, how do you want to play with that? You don't have to literalize everything.
Yes.
You can hold it that way or not.
And I'm just realizing we didn't really define witch, and I'm just curious, how do you define witch?
Well, witch is from the root word is originally, the root is more Wicca, which is the same root as willow. Wicker, how you get wicker from willow. So it's the idea that it's someone who moves with the flow of the wind, the way the willow can bend and not break and move with the wind. It's someone who moves with the flow of things. So you could call it, a Celtic European form of shamanism. Those are some of the, again, I kind of like to define things somewhat lightly, but for me, it's the Celtic European tradition, that pagan tradition, that for many of us has shamanic aspects, not for everybody. Not all witches do journey work or go between the worlds or do all that. I myself do it a lot, but it's not necessarily a requirement. It's more, and also, witchcraft is, as I said, it's a reconstructed tradition. And that's true of many pagan traditions at this point, because of how much, even of many, for instance, Native American traditions, because the children were sent to Christian school, they weren't allowed to learn what the elders had to teach them. There's a certain amount of reconstruction sometimes in many traditions, but that's especially true of witchcraft, that we don't have so much of a direct lineage, we have more of a reconstruction. And I like to say, as a friend of mine said, I practice witchcraft exactly the way my ancestors did 60,000 years ago. I make it up. and that there can be a lot of grace in admitting that we're making it up as we go along. And that doesn't make it any less powerful or profound, that we're just as able to achieve these altered states and connect with the earth in this primal way as any humans who've gone before us. But it's a matter of learning it, unlearning some of the things that would keep us from going there, and learning how to listen to the animals, how to listen to the birds, how to talk to the plants. You know, all these things, we can do them. It's just a matter of unlearning the idea that we can't.
Yes. And the word shamanism is in question these days.
Yes, people are often saying, well, you can't use this unless you're from the, a Russian tribe, because that's where the word comes from. And I'm like, well, the thing is, we've just gotten to the point where people basically have an idea what shamanism is. And if you look at language, words are taken from all different places. The English language is full of words from all different cultures. And so it seems a little, I think it's well-meaning, but it seems a little odd to me that people want to say, oh, you can't use this word unless you're from that culture. It's like, well, this is going to make communication incredibly difficult. If people from African descent can only talk using African-based words, and people from European who are French are the only people who can use French words, and it's just like, well, this is how language evolves: is we take words and concepts from different cultures and we start using them, and that's how language evolves. In order to have a common language, we need to use some words that mean the same things to the same people. I think it's good that it's being questioned is, again, because you see, I know pretty much everyone who's taken a weekend class now saying they're a shaman and they're open for business and they're trying to make money as a shaman. And, that it gets it has become a commercialized, again, something where people are just sort of stealing ideas from other cultures and then claiming them as their ideas, or saying that they have a right to pass those lineages down when they're not embedded within the culture itself. So I do think that gets, very problematic. I think you have to think about, what am I offering to people? What am I saying that I can actually help people with? And do I have permission from any native teachers who have taught me those things? And what words do they want me to use? I mean, it would be, again, like, where are you operating from? Who taught you? What did they tell you you could say or not say? I mean, all of those things would come into play. But I also think that often people get into that very, and it comes from a good place, that strong desire to be right and to do all the right things. But sometimes it's like Sylvia Plath said, perfection is terrible. It cannot have children. It tamps the womb. That there's a certain amount of where we get into these perfectionistic hair splitting things where we're just missing the boat on, well, what's the essence of what we want to do here? And people want to be very good, but you kind of see this thing happening in many different areas where people get a little crazy about how it gets into like just a lot of judgmental fighting.
Yes. And
a lot of, I'm better than you. I don't use that word and you use that word. And so I'm this good person and you're the bad person. It's like, oh gosh, it's, we're moving into the war mentality that we really need to escape.
I've spent most of my life there. That's partly why I'm feeling a little spacious lately.
Yeah, good for you.
Finally gotten at least 1 foot out, if not almost 2.
And good for you, because it is a tricky place to go.
Crazy.
Yeah, but it's challenging for us to kind of figure out where we're actually doing good and where we're just, as a, how when you were a kid and you're learning to ride a bike and it's really difficult to catch your balance. You go through this period where you have the wobbles and you fall a lot. And then at a certain point, you might realize, say, I can just stand here with the kickstand down and look cool. But actually learning to ride the bike involves a lot of wobbling and crashes. And that there has to be a certain amount of, yeah, like you say, spacious, a little bit more in the heart space of, oh, well, that person is crashing a lot right now, but hopefully they'll be learning to ride that bike soon,
Right.
and that we don't just sit around posturing with the kickstand down
Mm.
and pretending that we've got it all together,
Mhm.
because that's just not how you learn.
No.
So I guess I would say, well, let's not get too distracted by, semantics and, what's the more, what really needs to change. And, one of the things that really needs to change is that, spiritual teachers need not to be taking advantage of their students sexually,
Mhm.
and they need not to be taking advantage of their students' children sexually.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of that all over the place. And
Mhm.
that's in traditional teachers, and it's in Eastern teachers, and really it's mostly where you've got male teachers. And there are some women who cross that boundary too. So it's like, what's really important here? What could we really do that would take us into a more wholesome reality, a more wholesome world? How can we become more whole? What do we do? And that also, some of that perfectionistic posturing might not really be serving us as much as we think it is.
Mm.
How do we be setting those boundaries without just making it an appearance thing
Mm.
instead of a truthful thing?
Yeah, I like what you said about the heart, because there is, like you said, a lot of complexities to these things. So it's not just
Right.
throw the baby out with the bathwater, but can we hold complexity, and can we? The heart does seem to have enough space to hold all this, right?
Right. And I think a lot of that, because we're in this era where we've got the compute, everything's on the computer, and there's the Facebook, and it's like life is being more and more reduced to memes,
Mhm.
where people want this punchy little meme, and it's like, well, these things really don't usually address. I mean, if they're funny, I like them, but the ones that are very self-righteous, I always cringe and go, oh God. It's like, all this very new age posturing stuff. And you're like, oh, this is just not helping us very much here. It's trying to reduce, like you say, something big into some pithy little meme where this is how it is, and it's always how it is,
Mhm.
and it's all very simple. It's like, well,
Yeah. There's
often it's
a
not.
lot of wobbling going on. We're all wobbling together.
It's a lot of wobbling going on, yes,
Find
and
our
things are
way.
moving quickly. My name Cerridwen is a spiritual name, and she's the goddess of the cauldron. And the idea is that, as I say, in Broth from the Cauldron, that the cauldron was a big soup pot, and when you cut up a lot of things and you put it together, and it becomes more than the sum of its parts. So it's a very earthy metaphor for transformation. But often I think many of us feel right now like we're in the Cuisinart of Cerridwen, where things seem to be moving awfully quickly.
That's a good one. Mm.
And it's very hard for all of us to keep up and to feel like we can keep abreast of how quickly many things are seeming to change. And yeah, some compassion is usually a good idea in these situations.
Yes. Slowing down. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just aware we have maybe 10 more minutes. And again, like just liking and loving the experiential part of interviews. I'm wondering if there's any way we can drop into some, I don't know why I love using the word witchy, because somehow it makes it fun and light for me. And it helps me connect with it more.
It's
But
less scary, huh?
yeah, is there some way we can just drop into that, whether it's inviting the lineages of healers and midwives and herbalists and just kind of open up and see what wants to show up in the last 10 minutes? Would
Mhm.
that be okay?
Are you thinking of trying to kind of take people in a little bit of a journey, or what are you thinking?
Not so much. It's more like, what if we, so you and I are speaking as these two individuals
Mhm.
in this time and space,
Mhm.
speaking about other times and
Right.
spaces,
Mhm.
but even just having the dialogue while opening the space a little bit, right? So just like, okay, so we're here
Mhm.
in 2022, but so I'm just going to speak as I kind of invoke
Mhm.
in not a traditional invoking way, but is that okay if I kind of?
Yeah, go for it.
So here we are in 2022, April 15th. And I just want to acknowledge that we're not alone, right? So
Mhm.
I'm inviting and acknowledging the presence of our ancestors and any ones that are beneficial to be here, that have anything they want to add to this conversation or just be fed by this conversation, and all the nature spirits that our people learned to speak with and use for healing, and the water spirits that our people learned to divine and look into the cauldron and divine. Or I don't know if it's called the cauldron. You probably know a word for that. What's the word for divining water? Is there a word
Mhm.
for that? Yeah. So just
Yeah.
bringing that in. And as I speak, I'm kind of just the fact that I'm saying our people, like this feels new. Something's new here right now. Like I'm allowing myself to feel into our lineages, and being white, there's rarely a feeling of our people for me. So I'm
Mhm.
just, even that is new. Like,
Mhm.
and yeah, just wanting to make a space for the ancestors here and all the spirits of nature, and invite you into that space. And if there's anything that wants to be said from this space, that we allow that to be here.
Yeah, I like to definitely. I feel probably the most connected with my Scottish ancestors. That's an ancestry that's close to me. I've been there and been to many sacred sites and done rituals with the standing stones, and it's a very beautiful old tradition. And I also want to invite my ancestors who didn't do as well as maybe they would have liked to if they'd been older souls, my ancestors who made mistakes and harmed others, to be loved, and to that I understand that you were like kids at the time and you didn't know better, and I want to bring you home into some love and acceptance in my heart.
Mhm.
And I think that that's very important, that we don't just reject our white ancestry, but that we have compassion,
Mm.
for how some of our ancestors were not fully formed,
Mm.
were not able to express their highest self.
Yeah, that makes me want to also include and just let the ancestors know, my ancestors and European ancestors who are to be helpful and beneficent, like that white people, we've been cut off from our roots and we need help, and we're lost in a lot of ways. And also we're suffering as we wake up to the atrocities of then and now. And many of us, especially ones whose hearts are kind of wide open to collective suffering, are swimming in guilt and fear and shame and a lack of roots. And so any support for our people now who are trying to reconcile the history and the present and find ways to stand in honorable relationship with our own past and present, and reclaim what we need to feel whole. So I'm just inviting that
Mhm.
into the collective.
So mote it be is something we often say. So mote it be, may it be so.
Yeah.
And again, I want to say, that my first Heart of the Fire is a good source for actually putting yourself back in that time period when things started to really come apart in a big way. And there'd been other periods in which things fell apart.
Mm.
But I think it is important for white people to understand how we became disconnected from our own spiritual roots,
Mm.
because that's when we started behaving in a way. When we killed our own wise people,
Mm.
we disconnected from our soul and from our spirit.
Oh,
And
terrible.
until we reconnect with
Mhm.
that, we cannot be a helpful part on
Mm.
this planet. We really need to reconnect.
Ah, thank you so much. Nice to drop in with you in
Thank
that
you so much, Aninha. This has been a fun time.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to end the recording in gratitude for all your wisdom and all your intelligence and all your life experience and your ability to
And anyone who
articulate.
wants to connect with me for more, www.theheartofthefire.com. as a way to connect with my website and see what else I'm up to.
Thank you so much.